I'm Christopher Sweat, Graystack Media. I'm sitting here with Rep. Norma Hernandez in Illinois' 77th District. We don't have a lot of time, but I know you're busy, so thank you so much for making time to sit down.
Yeah, thank you for the interview.
Of course. I know there's one bill that we're going to talk about, which is it's a House Bill 2723, which some are calling Anti-Boycott Law, and the bill is designed to roll this legislation back. Maybe we could talk about your perspective on that bill, and then any other priorities that you have at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. So when this bill came into Springfield and it was filed, just for people to understand, we're here right now because of the genocide in Gaza, right? And even before that, and also before Abdel Nasser Rashid, which is our Rep Rashid, it wasn't really talked about. People didn't really know, and I was one of those people that was educated on the conflict that was happening overseas, and understanding also the decades of conflicts and issues that the Palestinians had to go through because of what's happened with Israel and Palestine. So when Rashid came to Springfield and we came in at the same time, that was really my real exposure to this conflict, and also because of what was happening across with the bombings and everything that happened in October 7th and after the fact. So me as a legislator, I didn't know what actual impact I had, because this is a foreign policy issue, right? But really, we actually do have an impact. We can create change, and this was one way on how we as legislators can have some say into what's happening outside of the state. And also making that connection to how it's actually impacting us locally, and how those two things actually do go hand in hand. So when Naz brought up this conversation to us in our caucus, and got educated more about how, wow, we're actually penalizing companies who want to boycott countries, Israel specifically, because that's the only country that we have a law that we can boycott. How is that even fair? How is that even a thing? Why did we even pass this legislation to begin with? And then seeing the actions of Israel and all of the international crimes that they're committing, businesses should have a right of who they want to do business with. And then understanding the pension conversation and how that's actually impacting our pensions. This was a real tangible way for us to do something about what's happening outside of the state. So that's why it was really important for me to support, and not only just to support, but to be an active legislator trying to also help people understand why we need to support this bill. But there's always two sides to the story, right? There's the governance piece, but then there's the political piece. And seeing how those two are playing out, it's really important that we get to a solution and to the votes that we need, and why we need to be actually passing this bill now with the supermajority that we have in Illinois. So that's why I felt like, with now that we're seeing another conflict arise in Iran, and seeing the continued destruction that Israel is doing across in the Middle East, it's more dire now that we actually do something about it.
And for the public and for stakeholders that may not understand, the supermajority, this has to do with the amount of Democrats in the chamber, or?
I mean, there's this idea, right, where Illinois is a supermajority, right? And I think Democrats need to be right on this issue. Right? It's not just progressive Democrats or specific kind of Democrats. All Democrats should be against what's happening across, in the Middle East, but also the tangible things that we can do as legislators now. And that's why, for me, I am putting it on my colleagues, right? We are a supermajority. We actually can pass something like this and get us back to neutral and do something that is the right thing to do. So that's why we have to come off in the way that we are now, which is aggressively saying we need to really pass this legislation. We need to talk to our leadership about it. I know there has been slow strides, right, to the point where now we may be getting a subject matter hearing, but that took a couple of years. That wasn't something that happened overnight.
How you got elected, I believe, in 2023. How has your kind of understanding of the policy process evolved over the last couple of years? And obviously, like, seeing this bill in its infancy kind of start to move through the policy process.
So it's been a huge learning curve for me, because I was never involved in any state government work. I have a background in social work. I also have a background in urban planning, and I was doing more research academic work, doing research that influences policy, but never seeing the actual bureaucratic process of how a bill gets passed.
Yeah, sure.
So then coming into Springfield, learning the whole process of how to file a bill, deadlines, committees, all of that I had to learn as I was doing it. And then you actually start to see the politics of these bills.
Okay.
And then understanding the dynamics of who and what, who believes in what, who are the, the groups that are going to support each other and things like you have to start finding your community within the legislature, because that is how you build your power within the bill that you want to pass.
I see.
So that's why it took me a little bit to kind of understand the process, but then also understand the politics of the process, and then the issue areas that we want to focus on, and then building your community around people that are also believing your issue areas or value-based people, which is kind of how we've been able to grow the opportunity for even this bill to be where it's at now.
Very nice. Okay, that's great to understand. And then are there other policies that are like top priorities for you at the moment?
Yeah, I do have a bill specifically on the digital ad tax, which is, we've had a lot of conversations about progressive revenue and taxing the rich, right? And we literally mean that. And this is something that we tried to do last year. We wanted to bring digital ad tax in last year, and we unfortunately were not able to get the majority of support in the House Democratic caucus. And this is a bill that technically is providing a 10% tax on digital ads to companies that are over $150 million. But there has been other states that have passed this, for example, Maryland, but they have gotten sued. We have drafted the language that's different than Maryland, where we can mitigate some of those lawsuits. But the thing here is that for example, the Attorney General, they're worried about what those lawsuits can look like. People are always afraid of lawsuits, but regardless, if you're getting $1 billion in revenue, I think it's worth continuing to understand how we can pass something to help address, the issue of revenue that we need, but also mitigate any kind of lawsuit that's coming our way. And I think we're getting to that point. We will be hopefully having a subject matter hearing on this. And then the other thing is that what's different about this bill is that we're not really, the argument that we can get sued on is that, well, if we're going to tax digital ads, then we should also be taxing newspapers. But what we're really taxing is the user data. How these companies are using our user data to influence how we shop, what we purchase, and you can't do that through newspapers, right?
Sure.
So there is a way for us to write it where what we're doing is taxing the people that are using our data for their own personal gain, right? Economic gain, because they're getting money off of us, right? So that's what we need to tax. And that's really the goal of this bill, is not much the digital ads, but the actual user data that these big tech companies are using and gaining profit for.
Okay, that's very interesting. And just like in the vein of tax the rich, how have you kind of seen like those conversations evolve? I know the policies seem to have to require quite a bit of creativity just because of how our legal and tax system is set up. But do you have any basic thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if just a couple years ago, maybe we wouldn't have gotten the same momentum to now. And it's in two parts, because we have a federal government that's been taking all this money away from our state programs, right? Not just our state, right, but across the country.
Right.
At the same time, while inflation has continued to skyrocket, right? This war has continued to raise gas prices, right? Affordability is now at its worst, or at its peak in our lifetime. So there is this reality that people feel we can't afford to buy homes. We can't afford to even get a car, right? Because even that went up. We can't afford to buy a house and rent and all that. And there's also a nice feeling when you have the mayor of New York City who's creating all of these cool statewide progressive revenue changes. For example, I think just yesterday or the day before yesterday, they're doing a $5 million tax on homes, on people that have second homes. And that's for generating about $500 million for the New York State. So at the same time as you have a mayor who just won and is very likable and is a democratic socialist passing legislation for the state of New York, not just the city of New York, there's momentum there. And we as Illinois have to also take on that momentum and continue it, and further file revenue bills that are, again, taxing the big corporations that are already getting tax breaks. This is the year that they've gotten the highest tax breaks. Why are we not Sure. Getting our money back, because it's our money that they're, taking. We need to do a better job with the revenue options that we have this year.
Okay, this is helpful to understand. Is there anything else that you want to share? Anything else coming up? Anything you want to tell our audience?
I definitely want our folks to stay engaged on this specifically, especially when it comes to reaching out to legislators that may not want to support some of the revenue options that our Tax Justice Coalition has been working through, because I do feel pressure goes a long way. I do believe that more educated that we are, especially the younger generation, because we're the ones that are most impacted. We're the ones that are not able to attain wealth because we can't afford to buy homes right now and doing things like that.
Sure.
I think it is our moment for young people specifically to stay engaged, understand that advocacy, whether it's political advocacy or through legislation and calling your reps, that does go a long way. So,
Awesome.
Making sure that we keep doing that.
Okay, thanks for sitting down. I'm sure I'll catch up with you again at some point, but very nice to meet you.
Yeah, no, likewise. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.